What would you do if the hotel you owned threw you out like garbage? And without realizing who you really were. A simple, modest woman is humiliated in front of a crowd, not knowing her husband is the billionaire owner of the very hotel that just treated her like trash. But when he arrives, everything changes. Stay with us. Because the revenge they never saw coming is just beginning. The storm slashed against the glass walls of the Navarro Hotel, rain pounding like angry fists, and inside the opulent lobby, marble floors gleamed beneath golden chandeliers. Guests in designer suits sipped champagne, and Clara stepped in, shivering, hair drenched, coat clinging to her like a second skin, eyes scanning the room for a single shred of warmth or welcome. But all she found were stares, whispers, sneers. "Is she lost a woman in a fur coat?" muttered to her friend, lips curling into a smirk. Or just insane. Clara tightened her grip on the handle of her worn suitcase, its frayed edges a sharp contrast to the sleek, polished world around her, and moved toward the front desk where a young clerk with a perfect smile and dead eyes looked her up and down, taking in the scuffed flats, the soaked dress, the hair clinging to her cheeks. "Can I help you?" he asked, tone dripping with condescension. And Clara swallowed, voice soft but steady. "I'd like a room, please, just for one night." The clerk's eyes flicked to the security guard leaning against the far wall, arms crossed, watching her like a hawk. "We're fully booked," the clerk said, turning away as though the conversation was already over. But Clara didn't move, didn't blink. "I saw online there were vacancies," she said, her voice trembling but firm, and the clerk sighed, rolling his eyes. "Yeah, well, maybe for people who can afford it," he said, louder now, and the guests nearby snickered, eyes darting over Clara's soaked, crumpled figure like vultures circling a carcass. "Besides," the clerk added, leaning in, voice dripping with false sympathy, "this isn't a shelter, honey, it's the Navarro." The words hit like a slap, stinging, and Clara's cheeks burned. But she forced herself to stand taller, to hold his gaze. "I just need a room," she said. "One night?" And the clerk's smile sharpened. "Sure," he said. "If you have $10,000, the crowd burst into laughter. Phones lifted, flashes blinding, and Clara felt her knees wobble, the storm outside raging like a reflection of the one roaring inside her chest, because she had nowhere else to go, no one else to turn to. And as the security guard stepped forward, cracking his knuckles, the clerk's sneer deepened. "Now, why don't you try the motel down the street, sweetheart?" Clara's fingers tightened around the handle of her suitcase, the cheap metal digging into her skin as the clerk's laughter echoed through the marble lobby, blending with the clinking of champagne glasses and the murmurs of guests who now turned to stare, eyes glinting with the same smug disdain as the clerk's. Did she seriously think she could stay here? A woman in a glittering silver gown whispered, flicking her perfectly styled hair over her shoulder, her diamond bracelet catching the light. "Look at her. She probably crawled out of a gutter," another man in a tailored suit muttered, his lips twisted in a cruel grin, and Clara stood there, skin burning beneath the weight of 100 judgmental eyes, the storm outside pounding like a drumbeat against her ribs. But she swallowed, forced herself to take a breath, to stand a little taller. "Please," she said, her voice cracking but still steady. "I can pay." But before she could finish, the security guard stepped forward, massive, imposing, arms crossed over his barrel chest. "We don't have time for charity cases," he said, his voice a low growl, and the clerk behind the desk snorted, pulling out his phone and snapping a photo of Clara without her permission. "Hey guys," he said, grinning as he typed, "check out the latest fashion trend. Homeless chic, straight from the gutter to the Navarro." Laughter erupted, cruel and sharp, and Clara's heart pounded against her ribs, every beat a scream she couldn't let out. And then, as if to seal her humiliation, a girl in a hot pink dress strutted forward, her heels clicking against the marble like a countdown to Clara's destruction. "Hey," the girl said, waving her phone in Clara's face, the screen flashing with the live stream already gaining viewers. "Say hi to my followers," she chirped. This is what happens when you try to sneak into a hotel for the rich and fabulous. More laughter, more stares, and Clara's vision blurred, the room spinning as shame wrapped around her throat like a noose, tightening, suffocating. But still, she stood there, head high, eyes blazing, refusing to let them see her break, because deep down, beneath the exhaustion and the fear and the bone-deep ache of being seen as nothing, she knew something they didn't, something that would change everything. And as the security guard reached for her arm, she bit down on her trembling lip and whispered to herself, "Just wait. He'll be here." The security guard's grip was rough, his fingers like iron shackles around Clara's arm as he yanked her toward the door, her heels scraping against the marble floor, her soaked dress clinging to her legs like a shroud. And behind her, the crowd watched, entertained, phones lifted to capture her humiliation, the clerk's grin widening as he leaned back against the counter. "That's right, sweetheart, don't forget to smile for the camera," he taunted, and the girl in the hot pink dress was now narrating to her followers. "And there she goes, folks, the queen of delusion getting a royal exit." More laughter, louder this time, and Clara's heart pounded like a trapped bird against her ribcage as the guard shoved her through the glass doors, the rain slashing against her face like icy needles, the wind whipping her hair into a tangled mess. And she stumbled, her suitcase slipping from her hand and hitting the pavement with a dull, hollow thud, spilling her clothes onto the wet sidewalk, socks and shirts and a crumpled family photo now soaking in the filthy rainwater. And still the phones kept recording, flashes lighting up the night like fireworks at a funeral. And Clara dropped to her knees, fingers trembling as she scrambled to gather her things. Her vision blurred by tears she refused to let fall. "Get up," the guard barked, looming over her like a dark shadow. "We don't want your kind here." And the clerk stepped outside now, holding an umbrella, not to shield Clara, but to shield himself as he snapped another photo, leaning down close enough for her to hear. "Bet your rich husband threw you out." "Huh. Or did you just make him up to get a room?" His words were knives, each one slicing deeper than the last. And Clara clenched her jaw, nails digging into her palms as she forced herself to stand, chin trembling, hair plastered to her face. And just as the guard reached for her again, just as the clerk lifted his phone to take one more picture, a sleek black SUV roared around the corner, headlights slicing through the storm like twin swords, and it screeched to a stop inches from Clara, water splashing up like a wave, and the door flew open, and out stepped Alexander Navarro, tall, furious, eyes blazing like a storm ready to strike, his gaze locking onto Clara, her soaked, shivering form, and then snapping to the guard, still gripping her arm. And in that moment, the entire world seemed to freeze. The wind stopped howling, the rain stopped falling, and Alexander's voice came out like a thunderclap that echoed across the lobby, across the street, across every single phone still recording. "Take your hands off my wife." The world fell silent. The guard's hand dropped as if burned, his eyes widening as Alexander's words hung in the air like a live wire, crackling with electric fury. And Clara stood there, chest heaving, rainwater streaming down her cheeks like silent tears. But her gaze never left Alexander's. His jaw clenched, eyes narrowed, every muscle taut like a predator ready to strike. And then he stepped forward, slow, deliberate, each step echoing like a death toll as the crowd watched. Eyes darting from Clara to Alexander to the guard who now looked as though he wanted to sink into the earth and disappear. "What did you say to her?" Alexander's voice was a blade, slicing through the air, his eyes boring into the clerk who swallowed hard, his smug grin evaporating into a mask of terror. "Sir, the clerk stammered, the umbrella slipping from his fingers and clattering to the ground, the live-streaming girl in the hot pink dress now holding her phone with shaking hands, the screen still flashing with hearts and comments as her viewers watched Alexander close the distance between him and the guard, who was now backing up, palms raised. "I didn't know." The guard choked out, sweat mixing with the rain that poured down his brow. "Didn't know what?" Alexander snapped, voice low and lethal. "Didn't know she was my wife. Didn't know this was her hotel. or didn't know that every single word you said to her is now on camera for the whole world to see. The guard's face went ghostly pale. The girl in pink gasped. "Oh my God, it's live," she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. And Alexander's eyes flicked to the phone. The crowd now watching him, holding their breath, waiting for him to explode. But instead, he turned, moved to Clara, reached out, and cupped her face in his hands, his thumb gently brushing the rain-soaked hair from her cheek, his gaze softening as he whispered, "Are you okay?" And Clara, whose knees had been shaking, whose heart had been pounding, felt herself shatter beneath the warmth of his touch, her eyes closing, a sob escaping her throat as she whispered back, "I just wanted a room." And the pain in her voice struck Alexander like a bullet, his jaw tightening, rage bubbling beneath his skin as he straightened, turned, and faced the staff who had dared to humiliate his wife. "A room," he said, voice echoing through the lobby like a king's decree. "You want a room?" And his eyes burned with a ferocity that made everyone flinch. "You'll get the entire goddamn hotel." Alexander's words crashed through the lobby like a tidal wave, sweeping away every ounce of arrogance, every smug grin, every whisper of mockery, and the staff stood frozen, their faces pale, eyes darting between Alexander and Clara, whose soaked, trembling form now stood like a queen reborn in the eye of the storm. And Alexander turned, his gaze slicing through the crowd, zeroing in on the clerk whose phone still dangled from his shaking hand. "You," Alexander said, voice cold as death. "Step forward." The clerk's knees wobbled, his smirk gone, his eyes wild with terror as he stumbled forward, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "I didn't know," he stammered, sweat mixing with the rain still dripping from his hair. "Didn't know what," Alexander said, voice a deadly calm. "Didn't know you were publicly humiliating the owner's wife? Didn't know you were live streaming her pain for your own entertainment?" The clerk's lip quivered, and behind him, the security guard edged backward, as if hoping to melt into the marble walls. But Alexander's eyes locked onto him next. "And you," Alexander said, each word a bullet. "How dare you lay a hand on her?" The guard swallowed, the veins in his neck throbbing. "Sir, I was just doing my job," he said. But Alexander's eyes blazed. "Your job," he hissed, stepping closer, so close the guard could feel his breath. "Your job is to protect my guests, not drag them into the street like garbage." And the guard flinched, the tension in the air coiling like a snake ready to strike. "Do you know what I see when I look at you?" Alexander said, his voice dangerously soft. "I see a man who thought he was powerful because he had a uniform and a badge. But what do you have now? Nothing?" And with a flick of his hand, Alexander snapped, "You're fired." The guard's mouth dropped open. "But sir," he began. But Alexander was already moving, turning to the influencer girl in the hot pink dress whose phone still shook in her hand, the live stream still rolling, comments flooding the screen. "And you," Alexander said, his gaze so fierce she stumbled backward, nearly dropping her phone. "You think it's funny to humiliate a woman for clicks. You think it's entertainment to strip someone of their dignity and call it content." The girl's cheeks flushed crimson, tears pooling in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered, voice cracking. "I didn't mean to." But Alexander raised a hand, silencing her. "Sorry," he said, his voice echoing through the now silent lobby. "You're not sorry. You're scared. There's a difference." And he turned to his assistant, who stood trembling nearby. "Get me every single recording, every single live stream, every single word that was said to my wife tonight." Alexander said, his voice a dark storm, "Because by the time I'm done, every one of them will wish they had never laid eyes on her." Alexander's commands shot through the room like gunfire, and the assistant scrambled, phone in hand, barking orders to the security team. "I want every camera angle, every security feed, every recording now." And the guard who had grabbed Clara now stood there, frozen, eyes wide, sweat pouring down his temple as Alexander's gaze locked onto him, like a predator eyeing prey. "Did you lay a hand on my wife?" Alexander asked, voice low and lethal. the kind of calm that comes before a fatal strike, and the guard swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Sir, I didn't know." But Alexander's jaw clenched. "You didn't know," he said, stepping closer, eyes blazing. "You didn't know, so you thought it was okay to grab a woman, throw her into the street, humiliate her in front of everyone." The guard's knees wobbled. "Please, sir, I need this job," he whispered. But Alexander's face was stone, unyielding. "You should have thought about that before you decided to play God in a uniform." And with a single, sharp nod, he turned to the assistant. "Fire him. Effective immediately. Blacklist him from every hotel under my name. I don't want him touching so much as a doormat on any of my properties." The guard's face crumpled, and he stumbled backward as security swarmed around him, hands grabbing his arms, dragging him toward the exit, his shouts echoing through the lobby. "Please, I'm sorry." But the doors slammed shut, cutting off his cries like a guillotine. And now Alexander turned to the clerk, who was already trembling, his phone still clutched in his hand. "You," Alexander said, voice like ice. "You thought it was funny to humiliate her. Thought it was a good show for your followers." The clerk's lip quivered. "Sir, I was just—" But Alexander's eyes blazed. "You were just what bullying a woman to make yourself feel powerful." Mocking her pain to get a laugh, he stepped closer, towering over the clerk, whose knees shook visibly. "Well, let's see how you like being the punchline." And Alexander nodded to the assistant. "Pull up the security footage, post it online, let everyone see what kind of man he really is." And the clerk's face went sheet white. "No, please, you can't." But Alexander's smile was cold as a blade. "Oh, but I can," he said. "You wanted to go viral. Congratulations. You're about to be the face of what happens when you treat a woman like trash." And the assistant moved swiftly, fingers flying over the phone, security feeds pulled up, video clips already being uploaded. And as the screens in the lobby lit up with the footage of Clara being mocked, shoved, thrown out into the rain, the room fell silent, the crowd watching, phones raised, the comments flooding in. "Who does he think he is? Disgusting. This is the real face of the Navarro staff. Unbelievable. Fire them all." And Alexander watched, his jaw tight, his fists clenched, eyes hard as steel, and the clerk, now sobbing, dropped to his knees. "Please, sir, I didn't mean to." But Alexander just stared down at him, eyes cold, voice merciless. "You thought she was powerless," he said. "You thought she was nothing." And he leaned down, his face inches from the clerk's. "But you were wrong, and now everyone will know it." The lobby was a battlefield of shattered egos and fallen pride, the clerk sobbing on his knees, the guard's screams still echoing faintly from outside, and Clara stood amidst it all, the storm outside raging like a reflection of the storm within. But as the chaos swirled, a quiet voice cut through the air, timid yet sincere. Ma'am Clara turned, blinking through the haze of tears and adrenaline, to see a young bellboy standing there, his uniform too big for his lanky frame, his hands trembling as he held out a steaming cup of coffee. "I thought you might be cold," he said, his gaze lowered, cheeks flushed. "Before all this happened, when they were laughing at you, I tried to bring you one, but they told me to stop." And Clara's heart clenched, the simple kindness cutting deeper than all the cruelty combined. And before she could respond, Alexander's gaze snapped to the boy, his expression fierce. "What's your name?" he asked, voice still laced with the fury that had leveled men twice his size. And the boy swallowed, eyes widening. "Nico, sir," he said, voice barely above a whisper. And Alexander stepped closer, his towering form casting a shadow over Nico. But when he spoke, his tone was gentler, a softness reserved only for those who had shown his wife compassion. "Nico," he said, "were you the only one who treated my wife with respect tonight?" Nico's eyes darted nervously to the fallen clerk, the retreating guests, the blinding lights of the security footage still playing across the lobby walls. "I think so, sir," he said, and Alexander nodded, his jaw tight. "Good," he said, then glanced at the assistant who was still typing furiously on the phone. Effective immediately. Nico was promoted to guest relations manager, and the entire room gasped, jaws dropping, including Nico's. "Sir," he said, eyes shining with disbelief. "But I'm just a bellboy." And Alexander's eyes blazed. "Not anymore," he said, then turned to Clara, his voice softening. "What do you think, love? Think he deserves it?" And Clara, whose chest was still heaving, whose knees still trembled, felt a warmth spread through her, a lightness like the storm finally breaking, and she smiled, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Absolutely," she said, and Nico's breath hitched, his hands shaking as he clutched the coffee cup like it was the most precious thing in the world. "Thank you," he whispered, voice breaking. "Thank you so much." And Alexander placed a firm hand on the boy's shoulder. "No," he said, his eyes fierce, his voice unyielding. "Thank you for being the only decent person in this entire place." And as Nico stood there, tears streaming down his face, the lobby that had once echoed with laughter and cruelty now fell into a stunned, awestruck silence, because sometimes, in a world built on wealth and power, the smallest act of kindness could still shine like a diamond amidst the rubble. The room pulsed with a heavy, charged silence, the kind that follows a storm after it's torn through a city. And, in that silence, Clara stepped forward, her soaked dress clinging to her body, her hair a tangled mess. But her eyes, they were fierce, burning with a fire that no one in that room had expected. And as she stood beneath the chandeliers that once cast shadows over her humiliation, she lifted her chin, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "You all looked at me and saw nothing," she said, her voice steady, unwavering. "You saw my wet clothes, my worn-out shoes, my empty hands, and you judged me." Her eyes scanned the crowd, each gaze falling away, each face now a mask of shame. "You laughed at me, called me a beggar, a scammer, a nobody," Clara continued, her voice rising, each word a blow, each syllable a strike. "But you didn't know that I own every wall in this building, every marble tile beneath your feet, every chandelier hanging above your heads." Gasps rippled through the crowd, eyes widening, jaws dropping, and Clara took another step forward, her fists clenched at her sides. "You looked at me and saw weakness, but what you really saw was your own cruelty, your own arrogance." Her gaze zeroed in on the influencer girl still clutching her phone, tears streaking mascara down her cheeks. "You," Clara said, pointing directly at her, "you filmed my humiliation for likes and clicks. But tell me, did it make you feel powerful? Did it make you feel better about yourself?" The girl whimpered, lower lip trembling, and Clara's voice dropped to a deadly whisper. "Your video may have gone viral, but so will this one," she said, nodding toward the screens where the footage of her public humiliation now played on a loop, the clerk's sneer, the guard's rough hands, the influencer's mocking laughter. "And when people see this," Clara said, her eyes blazing, "they won't remember your name. They'll remember mine." And she turned to the room, voice rising like a crescendo. "You all thought I was powerless because I was quiet, because I didn't wear designer clothes or flaunt my wealth. But power isn't in what you wear or what you own. It's in how you treat people when you think they're nothing." She stepped back, breathing hard, her chest heaving as she looked around. And for the first time that night, the crowd couldn't look away, couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, because in that moment, Clara wasn't just the billionaire's wife. They saw her for what she truly was, a storm they never saw coming. Outside, the storm had subsided, but inside the hotel, the aftermath of Clara's words hung heavy, rippling through the room like aftershocks from an earthquake. And as the crowd stood in stunned silence, Alexander moved to Clara's side, his arm wrapping protectively around her shoulders, his jaw clenched as he scanned the room, his gaze landing on the clerk who still knelt on the floor, eyes red, face ashen. "I gave you power," Alexander said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "I gave you a job, a title, a chance to make something of yourself, and this is how you repay me." The clerk sobbed, shoulders shaking. "Sir, I didn't know." But Alexander's eyes narrowed, hard as granite. "You didn't know," he echoed, his tone like a knife twisting deeper. "You didn't know the woman you shoved out in the rain was the woman who signs your paychecks, the woman who owns the very building you're standing in?" The clerk trembled, his sobs choking in his throat. "Please, sir, I didn't mean to." But Alexander's face was stone, unyielding. "You meant every word," he said coldly. "Every sneer, every insult, every ounce of cruelty. You meant it all." And then he turned away, his arm tightening around Clara as he led her through the crowd, each step a declaration, each breath a reclaiming of power. And as they moved toward the grand staircase, the influencer girl in pink, her makeup now streaked with tears, reached out a shaking hand. "Please," she whispered, voice breaking. "Please forgive me." Clara paused, looking down at the girl, eyes steady, unblinking. "Forgiveness isn't mine to give," she said, voice as soft as a razor's edge. "But the world is watching now, and it won't forget what you did." And as the girl crumpled to the floor, clutching her phone as if it could erase the damage she'd done, Clara turned away, walking up the stairs, each step echoing like a judge's gavel. And behind her, the screens continued to play the footage of her humiliation, the crowd's laughter, the guard's rough hands, the clerk's sneering face. Each frame a haunting reminder of how quickly power could shift, how easily a queen could be mistaken for a pauper. And as they reached the top of the stairs, Alexander opened the door to the presidential suite, ushering Clara inside. And once the door clicked shut, once the world was locked out, Clara's shoulders slumped, her knees gave way, and she collapsed into Alexander's arms, sobbing, the weight of it all crashing down on her like a wave she could no longer hold back. And Alexander held her, rocking her gently, stroking her hair, his own tears slipping silently down his cheeks as he whispered, "I'm so sorry. Clara, I'm so sorry I wasn't here." And in that moment, as the storm raged within her and the world watched from outside, Clara finally let herself break. Morning sunlight spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a warm, golden glow over the presidential suite where Clara sat curled up on the velvet couch, knees drawn to her chest, eyes fixed on the skyline, as if searching for something far beyond the city below. And Alexander knelt beside her, hands wrapped around hers, his gaze filled with guilt and sorrow. "Clara," he whispered, voice breaking, "you didn't deserve any of that." But Clara didn't respond, her eyes distant, still lost in the storm of last night's memories. The guard's hands shoving her into the rain, the clerk's sneer, the influencer's mocking voice, all of it replaying in a brutal loop she couldn't shut off. And Alexander's jaw clenched, his fist trembling as he looked down. "I should have been there," he said, voice cracking. "I should have protected you." And Clara finally turned, eyes meeting his, tears brimming like glass about to shatter. "I didn't need protection," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I needed to be seen." And the words hung heavy between them, cutting through the silence like a blade, and Alexander's heart twisted, a raw ache tightening in his chest as he pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she might slip away. "I see you now," he whispered, burying his face in her hair. "I see you." And as they clung to each other, the sound of a knock echoed through the suite, sharp, sudden, and Alexander pulled away, eyes darkening. "Come in," he barked, and the door swung open to reveal Nico, the young bellboy, his face flushed, his eyes bright. "Mrs. Navarro," he said, voice shaking. "You need to see this." And he stepped forward, holding out a tablet, and on the screen was a news headline, "Billionaire's wife humiliated in her own hotel. One staff fired. Public outcry erupts." And beneath it, the video footage played, Clara's humiliation looped over and over, her being shoved out the door, her clothes soaked, her eyes hollow, and the comments scrolled beneath it, a flood of outrage and disbelief. "This is sickening. How could they treat her like that? That clerk needs to be arrested. Queen Clara, that's who she is now." and Clara's eyes filled with tears, her hand covering her mouth as Nico continued. "It's everywhere, ma'am. People are calling you a hero." And Clara shook her head, her shoulders trembling. "I'm not a hero," she said, voice breaking. "I'm just a woman who wanted to be treated like a human being." And Alexander's jaw clenched, eyes darkening as he took the tablet, his gaze hardening. "Then, that's exactly what they're going to get," he said, voice as sharp as a knife, "because from this day forward, the Novaro will be a hotel that sees everyone, no matter what they wear or how much money they have." And he looked at Clara, his eyes fierce, unyielding. "We're going to rebuild it, love. We're going to make it right." And as the sun climbed higher in the sky, as the city below buzzed with the story that had shaken its foundations, Clara stood, straightened her spine, and met her reflection in the glass, eyes fierce, chin high, because she wasn't just the billionaire's wife, she was Clara Novaro, and her voice was no longer silent. It was a storm. Sometimes, the world only sees what it wants to see. Wealth, power, appearances, but when a simple woman's dignity is stripped away, the truth about what truly matters is revealed. And as Clara stands beside her husband, a man who now vows to change everything, she becomes more than a billionaire's wife. And she becomes a symbol, a force, a reminder that no one should ever be judged by the clothes they wear or the money they carry, because the storm she survived wasn't just a downpour. It was a reckoning